Today I have with me Chris Head, who is a comedy director, mentor and coach. And Chris was the very first person that I interviewed for Comedy Masterclass right back in March of 2023. And I've heard from lots of you how useful you found that episode, the frameworks that Chris shared with regards to creating narrative comedy. And in that episode, Chris actually mentioned one of his most popular blog posts, which is around structuring your 30-minute comedy or comedy drama script. So, of course, I went and read it. Incredibly useful. I read it multiple times, and Chris has very generously agreed to come back today so that we can unpack it a little bit and talk more things comedy. But before we dive in, Chris, that was about 6 months ago now, if my maths is correct. Is there anything else we should know about what you've been up to with your work since then?
Well, it's all the same stuff. Yeah, I've been mentoring writers.
Tell us, in case people didn't hear episode 1.
Oh, okay. For those who didn't hear, and apologies if you did hear, but here it goes again. But I've been mentoring writers, working on scripts. I'm directing an Edinburgh show. You might think, gosh, that's very early, isn't Edinburgh August next year? But of course, it's all starting now. So I'm doing that. Running my comedy courses, and I could go on, but it's whenever anyone asks me what I'm doing, it's kind of always that, so they could just replay that, and then that's probably what I'm doing next year, 2 years time. So it's I
love it though. It means you're a total expert at that, and great though to think that in the cold wintry November in the UK, you're already thinking about Edinburgh.
Yes,
next summer. That's how it goes. Exciting though. Wonderful. So this blog post, I found it really useful. Being the structure geek that I am, printed it out, put it in my notebook, underlined it, read it again. One of the shows that you'd mentioned in it, Hacks, already watched, absolutely loved. One of the shows that you mentioned in it, Mo, I hadn't seen, so went and watched. Brilliant show. Also found it quite heartbreaking too. Made tons of notes, so I found it really useful. But for writers who may hear the word structure and cringe just a little bit or feel like, oh no, why do you think you would encourage them to really engage with thinking about it? Or a different way of coming at it, if it's easier, is what prompted you to write this post in the beginning where you thought, oh gosh, these writers really need help for this reason?
Demystifying, really. A lot of writers, particularly newer writers, are a bit scared of this. I remember doing a one-to-one mentoring session with a writer who was developing a script with a production company, and said, I know I've got to get to grips with structure, but I don't really know how to do that, and I'm a bit embarrassed to ask. So, could we look at it? And it's not rocket science, as they say. And the other thing about it is that this structure that you can identify in a half-hour sitcom/comedy drama, you'd be very hard-pressed to find a show that doesn't do it, really. You can pick any show in this style and look for these beats in the story, and you'll find them. So rather than being the outlier who's writing a script where you're not following this shape, you might as well do it, but then you do it in your own brilliant way and with your characters, and you bring something fresh to it. And before we say a bit more about what it is, the analogy that I often like to use is with a pop song. So if you're going to write a pop song, then, well, we know there's a structure. There's an intro, there's verse, chorus, there's some kind of middle eight, whatever that is, key change, probably outro. It's got that shape. And if you're going to write a pop song, you do that. And of course, you do it in your own way, and you bring something fresh to it. And the listeners who are enjoying it don't really think about the shape of it. They just go, brilliant pop song. But if you're going to write a piece of music, and probably about 3 minutes roughly, but if you're going to write a piece of music that's half an hour and has no discernible verse chorus structure, might be brilliant, but it's not a pop song. So, it's the same with these half-hour shows. There's a structure.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I like that analogy as well. Makes total sense. And so I wondered if you wouldn't mind, I mean, if you've got a different way in, no problem. But if not, just introducing us to some of the key sort of terms in the blog post, because I find language really, really helpful, or terms really helpful for helping me like organize my brain. And I thought the terms that you've like are using and have created in this blog post are very helpful for doing that. So I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't mind sort of sharing what some of those are. So we've got some ways in.
Yeah, sure. And certainly my thinking here is, also it's obviously based on my own study and my own observation, but also, reading and learning from other people. So I wouldn't kind of sort of claim total credit in that way. But okay, so what I'd like to do is, it's great to have the blog post as a reference because people can read it.
Yeah.
And also, what I would like to do later on in this is I would like to figure out an episode of a completely brand new show with you within the podcast.
I love it. Yeah.
So, and then we can
Great, let's do it.
Can work to these beats and figure out the story. So essentially,
that sounds fun.
When you're working on a script, a helpful way of looking at it is 3 times 3. So you've got 3 acts to your story, which is just beginning, middle, and end. Really, it's just a fancy way of saying that. There are 3 big beats across the story, which we're going to talk about. And very often there are also 3 storylines. Now, the first 2, they're fundamental. You're going to do that. The 3 acts, 3 beats. But the 3 storylines is sort of optional, really. You might have 2, you might have 4. It'll be unusual just to have 1, but it's sort of not impossible. But kind of 3 is a sweet spot, at least as a starting point. It's very, very common. Now, just to say something about this word beats. So a lot of people say, the beats of a story. That just means when something changes, or more simply, when something happens that moves the story on. So there's going to be a lot of beats within a story. But what we're talking about here is kind of the sort of top level, the higher view of it, of the 3 main beats that shape your story. And so this will be your half-hour TV script, could be your half-hour radio script, but it could be a comedy play. It could be a movie. So we're talking about 3 acts. You can look at things 4 acts, 5 acts. So there are other ways of slicing it, particularly when you get to a longer narrative. But this will apply, and can apply and be useful, like within a comic novel, for example, as well. But let's just think about what these 3 big beats of the story are. So the first one is the turning point. So for your main character, your protagonist, something changes that changes everything for them. Now, it might be really fundamental that life is never going to be the same again, or it might just be this day is going in a different direction, but something now changes, and that sets them off down a different path. In movies, people often talk about the inciting incident, which can be another way of looking at it. But that's your first thing, and that's going to happen quite early in your script, what changes for your character. Then that sends them off on a particular direction that they didn't expect to go in. Then halfway through the script, you encounter the midpoint. Now, you might go, well, surprise, surprise, the middle of the script is the midpoint. That sounds sort of quite obvious, but it does a job. And the midpoint is upping the ante, heightening the stakes of your narrative, pretty much bang on halfway through. And once you know this, it's kind of remarkable that if you pick a show that's 22 minutes long and think, what's happening around about 11 minutes? Or if you pick a show that's 28 minutes long, you go, what's happening around 14 minutes? You go, oh my God. They're really upping the ante, raising the stakes. at this moment. So that's the second of our two big beats across the narrative. And then the third one is what I call the crunch point. I've also heard it called the worst point. Self-explanatory, really. The character has now been taken to a very challenging, decisive moment. And so you're looking for those to hit those three big beats across the script. Now, the midpoint is always in the middle, but the turning point can be sooner or later. So in the blog post, one of the shows I write about is Alma's Not Normal. And she has an aspiration to be an actress. And she's had an audition. She's very excited. She's had to go to the job centre because she's on job seekers allowance. And she discovers that in order to stay on job seekers allowance, which she really needs to do, she has to express an interest in a job she's not remotely interested in at a Subway type sandwich bar. And so that's the turning point for her. And that is about, in the script, I'm trying to think now, it's maybe 4 pages in. So your turning point could be 3 pages in, 4 pages in, 5. So we're thinking here that your half-hour script's going to be 30 pages. So in Catastrophe, it's an interesting example. The script is 30 pages when you look at it. Incidentally, reading scripts is obviously a very inspiring, informative, important thing to be doing as a writer. And sometimes you might get a script and you go, well, this is a half-hour script, but it's 37 pages, so that I'm going to write 37 pages. But everyone works by the rule of thumb, 1 page equals 1 minute. So, which is very, very, very rough and not 100% accurate, but that's people's starting point. So when you're submitting a spec script to a producer or a competition, if it's half an hour, just go for 30 pages. And it's very classy if you've done it in that exact 30 pages, but maybe it's 31, maybe it's 32. But thinking about Catastrophe, which as it happens, these are both the first episode of the first series that we're talking about. The turning point comes 9 pages in, which is quite a long way in for a 30-minute script. But it's a good example because it's one that needs more time. And in that story, with Sharon Horgan and Rob Delaney, their characters, Sharon and Rob, Rob is in London on business, and they have a fling, and a wild affair that they know is only going to last for as long as he's in London, and they might never see each other again. And so that happens. He goes back to the States. Sharon discovers she's pregnant, tells him. He says, "Oh my God, but okay, we're basically strangers, but I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to move to London, move in with you, and we're going to be mother and father to this child." That's a lot to set up. And for a turning point, this is enormous. So, the Alma's Not Normal turning point is Alma having to be more realistic about what her career might be, which is a big psychological turning point, but she's still holding on to hope. But this is, everything is now different. And the Alma one, you can see, in fact, we can share links to both these scripts. You can find out. But one's relatively early, one needs more time. But if you think your turning point between 3 and 7 pages, roughly, but I mean, these things are never set in stone, and it's Act 1. So the turning point happens at the end of Act 1. Sometimes the turning point is a little earlier in Act 1, and there's some kind of other ratcheting up of the stakes at the end of Act 1. But it's very common for the turning point to also be end of Act 1. Then what you do is you're working towards the midpoint. And in Alma's Not Normal, she's been holding out for this acting job. Exactly halfway through, she discovers that she's not got it. And so now, things have got appreciably worse. And by the end of Act 2, which is where your crunch point is, she has decided to go have a night out. She's also split up with her boyfriend, who's carried on with his life. And they end up sleeping together again, but that's very bad and complicated. And she decides to kind of get it all out of her system, go clubbing, maybe meet a guy, have fun, feel better about herself. But by the end of the night, she feels totally shit. Thinks my life's hopeless. I'm stuffed. And that's the end of Act 2, which is the crunch point. So you're looking for the crunch point to be that end of Act 2 moment. And then Act 3 is what, of course, wraps it all up. Now, if we're thinking about the first episode, it's also going to be the thing that tees up everything to come. And in Alma's Not Normal, she decides to become an escort. And I'm talking about the pilot here. The first episode of the series proper, they kind of retold the story in a way. Quite often the pilot becomes episode 1, but in this case, they did a new episode 1, but covers the same beats essentially, but in a slightly different way. But in both cases, the end of the episode is I'm going to become an escort, teeing up everything that's to come. The end of Catastrophe is Rob and Sharon are in bed together after this fling, and she's thinking, basically, I've got this more or less stranger in my bed and we're going to make a life together. And she looks at the ceiling and she's like, fuck. I mean, she doesn't say fuck, but that's the expression on her face, and that's sort of teeing up everything that's to come. So you can read more about those beats on the blog post. And in terms of the storylines in Catastrophe, there's one main story. There's the A story, which is Rob and Sharon getting together. But they put in a B story, which is Sharon getting diagnosed with something they call pre-cancer, which is something that's not yet cancerous, but is a concern. And in fact, it's fine in the end. But that creates a B story and adds more tension. But that script, there's a lot of focus on the A story. In Alma, so the A story is needing work, wanting to be an actress, that not working, deciding to become an escort. That's the A story. B story is her situation with her ex. The C story is stuff that's going on with her mother and grandmother. So that has got Alma's absolutely classically shaped. The three acts, the 3 big beats and the 3 storylines, whereas Catastrophe is actually 3-3-2, and the A story is much more substantial than the B story, although the B story is meaty. So you're looking to do those things in your script, and when you've identified that, be hard pressed to. Well, you won't see a show that doesn't do these things. Just whatever you watch. And sometimes people go, "Oh, is it just episode 1?" But it's any episode. To get a story going, something has to happen. So something changes for your characters. They hit a midpoint, the ante is up, stakes are raised, they hit a crunch point. So it's like a sandwich in that Act 1 is one slice of bread, and then Act 2 is most of it, which is the big filling of the sandwich, and Act 3 is the other slice of bread. So you could think 5 pages, 20 pages, 5 pages, although it's not quite that neat, but it's roughly that shape. But the other thing on this is people sometimes say that these 3 acts are actually a disguised 4 acts, because the midpoint you could look at as an end of Act 2, and then the rest of Act 2 you could call Act 3, and then Act 3 you could then call Act 4. And certainly when you get to writing what they call the commercial hour of TV, then you are looking at 4 acts, but actually it's the same thing, but you're now calling it 4 acts instead of 3. So I've said a bunch of stuff there. I hope that's all clear.
Yeah, and that makes loads of sense. Yeah,
I'm aware that this is technically a conversation, and Kate, you've not got a word in, but could I just tell people that I'm not like this in real life? If you meet me, I will ask you questions, and you will be able to say things. This is I'm on kind of transmit.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can vouch for that, but it also makes sense that you're laying out a whole map for us. I do have some questions, but thank you. But it's helpful to lay all that out. I appreciate it. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, how do you think thinking about this structure helps ensure that the protagonist remains really active? Because I think that's one of the things that I think this structure is really useful for.
Yeah. So first of all, you're thinking, what's going to change that's really going to challenge my protagonist, that's going to really shake things up and change things for them. And, depending on where you're pitching your narrative, if you're in the comedy drama space and you're looking for something really quite dramatic, then this is going to be a big thing. But if maybe you're doing something more naturalistic or, kitchen sink drama style, then it will be something a bit smaller, like, the cat's gone missing, or, but either way, it's still that turning point, and it makes your character act. They've got a problem now that they need to address. They need to take decisions. They need to do stuff. And so they're now doing that. This is not what they expected to be doing today, but now they're doing this. And when you get to the midpoint, you're twisting the knife. You're making the challenge bigger for them. And so if it's comedy drama, I don't know, the turning point is the characters found a long lost daughter they didn't even know they had. It's really massive, or it's something smaller like the cat's gone missing. Say the turning point is, but it's interesting actually, because sometimes the turning point can be something that the audience knows but your character doesn't. So in this case, it might be the audience discovers that this young woman is an imposter. She's not who she claims to be, but your protagonist doesn't know that. So that's an interesting turning point. It creates dramatic irony. The audience knows something the character doesn't know. So kind of the turning point, it's much more common for something to confront your character directly, but it can be something that the audience discover, that they go, oh, this is more complicated than I realized, so that could be a midpoint. But like in the cat storyline, let's say the midpoint is the cat very sadly has been run over by a car, but don't worry, it is still alive. There's hope, but there's the midpoint. And the crunch point with the cat, she's got to decide whether to put it down or not. The crunch point with the daughter is, the woman suddenly starts to suspect something might be up, and she's deciding whether to kind of push this or challenge this person. But this sudden daughter's filling a hole in her life, and she decides no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to think about it, And so there's a couple of examples of, different levels of drama, but that are both kind of significant for those characters. But those would also be, the A stories, like the B story in the cat episode could be, we're thinking more everyday stuff. The cat owner has had problems with her TV reception, and the guy who's going to fix the TV aerials coming round. And, but it's really complicated because the cat's gone missing, but I really want it sorted out, And the thing with the daughter appearing, maybe our woman in that story, she's under a lot of pressure at work, and there's going to be, downsizing, and a load of people are going to lose their jobs. And because she's under a lot of new stimulation pressure with this girl suddenly appearing, it's sliding at work. And it could be that at the crunch point, she gets made redundant, so the B story collides there. But when you've got really serious things going on, quite often the C story is a lighter story. It's not always the case, but quite often it's a lighter story. So in the C story, I don't know, she's wanting to get a tattoo, and she's trying to decide what it is, and it's a bit kind of lighter, and it's sort of kind of played in a more sort of playful way. But kind of, I think, I mean, obviously I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head, but if it's sort of so much easier when you've got that rhythm and you've got that structure, because you know what you need to do and you know what this story needs to do, and you can hit those beats and know that you've got a well-shaped story. And not only that, it's a story that anyone reading your script will either know about this, and of course if they're in the industry they're going to know, but even if they don't know, kind of intuitively it will feel right. And if it gets made intuitively to the viewer, it's going to feel right, because this is what they've seen 1,000 times, but they've just not thought about it.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to ask if there's any writers who are listening or watching who are like, but I've already spent ages working on this script and I didn't know about this structure, and maybe I'm doing some things right, but some things not. What would you say to them? Because I know that you're really good at helping writers who bring scripts in all kinds of states for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is I would say when you're starting on a project, it's a really good idea to take a step back and not worry about this, actually. So if you've written a bunch of stuff without thinking about this, that is no bad thing. And to give you an example, I did a Zoom session with a writer this morning, and she's working up a new idea. And in fact, she's done some training with me before on a Zoom course and is sort of well aware of all of this, and kind of came in with the thought that we would talk about this stuff. And we sort of touched on it. And I said, but let's not worry about it too much for now. You know, you've got this really interesting relationship between this couple. It's a good dynamic, but just write some scenes. Write me 5 scenes with this couple. And in fact, don't make them like particularly significant or dramatic scenes. Let's just see them rubbing along together in life and in different situations, and try and understand who they are and what's funny about them. And so, you know, if you've written a bunch of stuff and you haven't thought about this, well, great, you know, because you've got the raw materials and you've learned more about your characters and your world. And I would say a next thing actually is to disassemble your script and look at it as a bunch of scenes. And then if you kind of give each scene a title and write that title on a Post-it note and then stick it on the wall, and, you know, maybe if your landlord wouldn't mind, or if you own your house, if your partner or whoever wouldn't mind, you could draw a line on the wall. You know, this is end of Act 1. This is the turning point. This is midpoint. This is crunch point at the end of Act 2. Or somehow demarcate it and go, what are these scenes that I've got? What if I were to reorganize them in this shape? What scenes don't I need? What scenes do I need? You know, and you can start to reconstruct it on that basis.
Yeah, I love that. And I used to be really resistant to writing scenes that I didn't think I was going to use. I think it's like that scarcity of time when you think, I've only got this amount of time, I have to make it really count. But it like so worked against me. And actually in the episode with Sherice Griffiths, she was incredibly encouraging about and described really well a lot of the scenes that she writes just to get to know her characters. Shout out to Sherice for the prompt to do that. I totally agree with you now. And now it's great because you can really play and have fun and find unexpected things and still then bring it back to the kind of structure, like you say.
Exactly.
And I do, though I could draw a black line on the wall. I tend to use Scrivener now for organizing things. I know not everyone likes that, but at least now I can divide it into my acts, and you could demarcate it and move your little things around the cookboard. But sometimes it is nice to see it all on the wall, isn't it? Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Brilliant. So I wanted to ask a couple of other questions, and also then it'd be great to know if there's more things you'd like to put in before we wrap up. And one of them is, like, because you're so helpful with doing these frameworks, is there any particular like flavor of advice that you just find that writers really struggle to take on board, and you just kind of sit there seeing over it again from the outside? Because I think there are some things, like, for example, for me, definitely it was being prepared to write things that I wasn't going to use was something that I just struggled with for a while. Are there any things that you think either particularly helpful to get people out of different ruts, or that you just kind of patiently wait for writers to realize that when they do listen, it's going to be so much easier for them?
Well, one thing I'd say is to be aware that there's 2 different kinds of writing.
Yeah.
And that don't try and do them both at once.
Oh,
But
you're hitting me right in the, because it took me so long to learn that. Say more, please. Save people some pain.
So the two different kinds of writing, one is the play,
Yeah.
when you're having fun and exploring, and the other kind of writing is actually the hard work, where you're putting structure and shape and form to it. And if you only do the play side of things, then it's a formless mess but fun. But also, if you only do the structure side of things, you can still write something, but it can end up a bit feeling dry and mathematical. So you want to do both, and you can't do them both at once. So it's like deciding, what am I doing? Well, right now I'm doing this. I'm playing, and I'm going to create a load of scenes and a bunch of stuff and put them away. And okay, now I'm in phase 2. I'm going to put some structure and some shape onto it. And being aware of those two phases and moving between them is really helpful. And actually, the other thing I want to say while I think of it is that the audience and the reader of the script actually shouldn't really notice the structure. So someone reading it analytically and thinking, is this a well-structured script? They're going to be looking for it and they'll notice it. But ideally, even someone like me who's thinking about this stuff all the time will just go, wow, these characters are great and I'm loving this story and I want to turn the page and it's making me laugh. And so it's there, but it's the support that you've forgotten about, because you've got characters and a world and a story, and that's what we're now interested in.
Yeah, I love that. Beautifully expressed. And honestly, like when you say it so beautifully simply like that, I cannot believe it took me so long to figure out, like really separating those modes out. And I think I spent quite a long time like veering back and forth between trying to get really, 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 really organized and outline everything and be hyper structured, and then like trying to veer the other way and then ending up with a mess, to trying to actually find a process that works for me and being clear about what I'm doing. I feel like it took me a ridiculously long time to figure out, and I'm sure I'll still forget and have to remind myself many times. It's great having this podcast. I can re-listen to my own podcast in the gym and hear Chris reminding me what to do.
Yeah.
So it's
excellent.
great. Love it. And
so
I also go for it.
Sorry, I just want to bring it. So what I want to wrap up with is you and I brainstorming a show idea. But go on, if you've got another question, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I want to do your idea, so let's do that. I've always got 50 more questions, so let's do it. Sounds fun.
Okay, so what I want to do at this point, as we're coming to the finish, Danielle, is to think about a show and imagine that we're writing a script.
Great.
Now, one thing I want to just say as a side note is, so in this world of writing TV half hours, trying to get the attention of a producer with your work, a piece of advice people often give is don't send episode 1, send episode 4 or whatever they say, and that's all right. That's not bad advice, but because the reason why they say that is they go, there's no other episode like episode 1. Episode 1's setting everything up. It's like an outlier. And then so send one that's more typical. And I think that sends you down the wrong path and gets you thinking about it in an unhelpful way, in that, episode 1 is going to be, of course, walking the audience into a world and into characters. However, what it should be doing is showing off the characters that we're going to love, the kinds of situations they're going to be in, the kinds of conflict that they experience, the kind of funny stuff that we're going to enjoy, whatever episode, that should all be there in episode 1. So episode 1 should be as good an example of what this thing is as any other. And I was talking to Lucy Lumsden recently, who I work with in various ways, and you've spoken to.
She's been on the show.
Yes,
listen to Lucy's episode. She says so many wise things.
Amazing. She's really great. And so she's a TV producer now, having been a commissioner in the past. And I spoke to her about this, and she said, "Send in episode 1. I want to see episode 1. I'm like a viewer who's being introduced to this world, and I want to come into it at that point. I don't want to feel like I'm joining halfway through a series." So there you go. So I would say maybe don't get so hung up on that, or more importantly, episode 1 should be a showcase for everything that's great about this series, and don't think of it as an outlier. So there's that.
That's good.
So we're working on episode 1 of this show. So I did have a think.
Yes.
And I thought, we could do this. I had to think what it could be.
Let's do it.
So what I thought is, so you're doing these podcasts, and it's a comedy masterclass.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, well, let's make up a show where someone's recording podcasts. You know, a woman like yourself. Great. But just to fictionalize it a bit, I thought it could be a money masterclass. So it's kind of about in investing and etc. Yes. I'm not the most kind of money fluent
crypto.
Person, so that was the end of my money knowledge. So maybe I need to do some research before we write this. But
okay. Yeah.
But so that's what we're gonna do. Now, this is another topic that I'm going to broach right at the finish here. And I could say a lot more on this, but I'm going to be fairly focused for this. The central character, basically you, a fictionalized version of you. They're the protagonist.
Oh, great. Good man show.
But but I like to call the protagonist the striver. That's my own word for that character, because it just reminds you what they should be doing. You know, they're constantly striving to better themselves or to get out of their situation, improve their life, or, you know, win that job or that person or whatever, become a millionaire, become famous, whatever it is, they're striving away. Then above them, you need a boss. So I'm not using that word to be synonymous with manager, although there could be a manager. I just mean the person with authority who's got power in the situation. So we've got the version of you, who I'm going to call Danny, who's doing her money podcast, bringing in people from the world of finance. And in fact, unlike what we're doing, they're coming round to her house. You know, so we've got some in-person stuff, more interesting to look at on TV. So quite often I would say a boss character is going to be her guest, because, you know, they're an authority in the world of money. So relating to Danny, who wants to learn more about savings and investments and markets and things, they're a boss. So her guests are often going to be a boss to her. And she really needs them, otherwise she's got no podcast. So there's a real possibility there for them to kind of mess her around, or give her the runaround, or be arrogant and inflated, or be, you know, not as knowledgeable as they made out, but putting on this authority. But so there's a lot of fun to be had there with those characters. But we also need someone who's like because I think in this show, probably each episode there'll be a different guest. So it'll be a bit like a Fawlty Towers setup, where you've got, you know, someone new each week. But we need someone in Danny's world who's the boss, you know, the person with power over her, who's just in her world all the time. So Danielle, who could that be?
Yeah, who do I want to have power of me? So it could be. So if we're going for if it's a rented space, it could be the landlord or landlady of the space who who interrupts or is nosy or wants to know what the comings and goings of all these people are.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. And a couple of times in my life, I mean, when I was much younger, I sort of rented a room once in a house and once in a flat, but where the landlord lived there. I guess you're kind of a lodger, really, in that setup.
Yeah.
That's always really tricky. So let's have the landlady there, the owner of the house. And I did once, this was so long ago, but I rented a room in a flat in Fulham, and the woman who owned the flat was very, very elderly, very cantankerous, and just seemed absolutely furious that I was there, despite the fact that she'd advertised the room and I was paying her money. So,
I've met some of them.
so let's base our landlady character on her. So this cantankerous older woman. The thing I always remember is sitting in my room and hear her going, "Mr. Head, Mr. Head," up the stairs, and I'd open the door and go, yes, and look down the stairs and just go, there's crumbs in the kitchen, or, whatever it was that I'd done.
Yeah.
And I moved out of there fairly quick. But so Danny is in this house, and let's say she has invested some money in setting up a bit of a studio. So she's done some soundproofing and she's got her equipment in. So she's more stuck.
Yeah.
So the thing that I was starting to think is, why does she stay?
Yes.
So, and the rent's really cheap. That was the other thing about the flat in Fulham. I think she wasn't totally up to speed with current, rental rates in that part of London, and it was cheap.
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't enough to offset the pain of being there. So yeah, we've got those things. It's really cheap. And I guess Danny is trying to invest money. I guess she's losing a lot of money with her investments. So that's a nice kind of background sort of stress. So what you have is you've got your striver in the middle, your protagonist, and you've got the boss. Figured out who that is. Also, the guests are bosses. Now what we need is a fool, who is the character who's kind of a bit of an idiot or socially awkward or just stupid, and who's creating problems for Danny. And so who could that be?
I'm wondering if there's maybe like even if it's like lo-fi like this one, a sort of show producer editor, because it's not as easy as it looks. Riverside says you just press the button, but actually there's a bunch of stuff that happens. I've learned the hard way afterwards. So I wonder, but maybe because she doesn't have money, it's not someone she can really pay. So it's a kind of friend who's a bit more techie than her, but also has lots of incompetencies.
Perfect. Yeah. So the fool character is very often just stupid. So a classic example would be Baldric, or Manuel. But sometimes the fool actually is intelligent, but it's their kind of social awkwardness or their kind of naivety, their gaucheness that makes them a fool. Like Niles in Frasier, he's actually the fool of the piece. The father is the boss. Obviously, Frasier is the striver. Yeah, great. So she's got this kind of techie nerd who helps her out, but is, she's not paying and is sort of socially awkward and unpredictable and unreliable. Yeah, so that's the fool that she's got to deal with. And every now and then one of the guests might be a fool, They seem to have the credentials, but actually they're a fool. So in this boss driver fool setup, it's also really helpful to have a foil, who's the normal kind of grounded character. So this is like Tim from The Office, or Polly in Fawlty Towers, who's like the more reasonable person that the audience can actually identify with, and who really sees how mad this setup is. So who could this foil character be in Danny's life?
I'm wondering about like a boyfriend character who, when they come into the world and sees that, because like, for example, I used to run a theatre company, and sometimes my house, like I would realize when someone came around who wasn't involved in it, how mad it must look, because the living room would be overtaken with pieces of set, and I would be doing all these things that I'd agreed to do at like almost no notice. And so I'm wondering someone who comes into that world from the outside, right, like a boyfriend or a best friend who has a job, has things figured out.
Yeah, exactly. Spot on. Exactly what I was going to say. Because you want opposites. So, Danny's losing money on her investments, has got this big idea. Any day now, I'm going to make 100K and everything's going to turn round. And I'm doing these podcasts, so I'm learning stuff, but, it's raising my profile. Maybe someone will give me a job. So she's got all of these hopes, but actually she's really struggling for money and is living in this crazy place. And you've got the boyfriend who is the sort of grounded one who has got his stuff together. And I think he's constantly on at Danny, why don't you move in with me? I've got this flat, we've been together for, 2 years now. It's time, come on, just get out of this place. We can set up your studio. But of course she's, in my flat, but she's reluctant. She likes her independence. She's not totally sure about this guy. And so we've got our worlds set up here. And so now what we need is the I'm wondering if this should be 2 episodes, but what we need is so the A story of this episode. So we need a turning point. So Danny is in this whole kind of situation, and she's got a guest coming along. Let's say, to raise the stakes, that she's got a former governor of the Bank of England who, like,
Oh,
I don't know, her mother goes to the gym with, and she's been on
right.
at him for, like 18 months, and he's finally showed up. So, well, I mean, maybe that's the turning point. The mother phones up and says, I've got, Mark Carney, that he's going to do it, So that
Yeah.
there we go. That could be our turning point for the episode. So she's kind of
Right.
bobbling along. The landlady's on her case. Maybe this guest she did have lined up, it seemed a bit flaky anyway. They're nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, I've got Mark Carney. Oh shit! Wow. So here's a big turning point. So obviously now, get a new outfit, tidy the place up, maybe redecorate.
Yes. Yes.
Really revise, be on top of the topic.
Yeah.
Get
a
snacks
suit
in.
jacket.
Yeah. Get everything ready. So Mark Carney shows up. So what could be a midpoint in terms of something going wrong or raising the stakes?
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think whether it needs to be something for her or whether it's linked to one of the other characters that we have. So who have we got? We've got the landlady, we've got the boyfriend, and we've got the tech person. So everything that I'm thinking of is a little bit little for a midpoint.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a thought.
I think something with the landlady.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, I mean, this is quite sitcom-y, but the fool, was out on a bender the night before, and she's trying to get a hold of him. He's got a tech, this recording with Mark Carney, struggling to get him to come in, finally does come in, but he just sort of pukes everywhere or can't do it. Oh my God, I've got vomit to clear up. Staggers out of the place. And then, I mean, that could be a midpoint, but I'm thinking she, in kind of sitcom land, she recruits the landlady to do the tech for this interview with Mark Carney.
Okay, yeah, because I was like going down things like power cut, but then I was like, but then it really nixes it and makes it, yeah. So that uses the characters. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that could be a midpoint. It's like, oh shit, I've got to. My landlady's going to do it. So probably she hasn't shown up yet. So she's got to brief the landlady, and I think my feeling is she's quite excited about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, what if she likes it a bit too much? I could see it.
Yeah. Because you might go, oh, she's very cantankerous and she's going to be pissed off about doing it. But actually, I think it's more fun if she's going with it and is a bit excitable, and we see a different side to her. And in fact, Danny's having trouble putting her back in her box. Then
she might be interested in the money. We might have found one of her key motivations, the landlady. Yeah,
nice. Yeah, maybe she fancies Mark Carney as well. So he turns up, and I think there's a lot of fun actually in trying to train her and put her back in her box. But so then I think actually the crunch point is Mark Carney turns up. So this is the end of Act 2. We've probably got about 5-6 pages left. And he turns up, and it's a total fiasco, of course, because the landlady's all over him, unwelcome hospitality, messing things up. Technically, Danny's absolutely tearing her hair out, and Mark Carney goes, I was willing to do this as a favour for your mother, but, I'm not doing this, It's like, oh, no, please, no, So it's nice. You're kind of going, oh, poor Danny, we're kind of... We're starting to, be invested. So this is her crunch point. He storms out. So now we're into Act 3, and it's going to be the next day, I'd say, as we go into Act 3. So obviously there's time passing between Act 2 and 3. I'm going to say obviously, but I mean, it's not, Act 3 is never going to be just immediate. There's always like at least an hour or something, but kind of more commonly it's later that day or that night. But the next day is super common, or a couple of days later. But we're now the next day, and maybe the boyfriend's there, kind of consoling her.
Yeah.
Well, can we give her a happy ending? What's the happy ending at the end of the episode, Danielle?
I like happy endings, so Yeah, because I don't want the boyfriend and the giving it up path to win. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to think who she could get a call from. Is that a bit cheesy?
Maybe. Or maybe, you know, in terms of this story, maybe Mark Carney comes back, or it's where basically your character's going to win or they're going to
Or maybe
lose. Yeah,
I'm
go on.
wondering, because also this might be the feminist in me coming out, but I'm wondering if there's someone that's even better than Mark
Nice.
Carney, or if
I
that's
like
not
it.
the thing of the crunch point. But if maybe there's someone that because again, like she thought she wanted the suit and him, but
Yeah.
maybe there's a better option. Maybe there's a female guest.
Yeah, great. Okay, so let's say it's Rachel Reeves, you know, Shadow
Yeah,
Chancellor, that
yeah,
she
yeah,
lands, and yeah, who just happens to know the mad landlady from days of old, and the landlady, you know, has
yeah.
got flowers, is apologising, and has turned it round, and here's Rachel Reeves, and oh my god, that's a nice happy ending. So there you go. You know, we've made something up that feels okay. In fact, feels quite fun. You know,
Yeah,
in not
yeah,
much time, but you know what facilitated that was having that structure. And once
yeah,
you've got the characters and the story, you can sort of forget about it because you know that's the raft that took you to the other shore. You don't need to carry the raft around with you. You just get on with, you know, the characters and the story that you've now got. But one thing I will say is that's the A story. So now I'm not going to do this any depth, but
yeah,
we would now be thinking
yeah,
about the B
yeah. No,
story,
I get it.
and the B
Mm,
story can also hit those beats, although you're a little bit more relaxed with the B and C, but you could mirror those beats in the B story. So you know the B story probably something about the boyfriend, and he's trying to book a holiday. You know, she needs some time away from this. You know, this studio, and he's trying to get this holiday
yeah,
sorted. That could be the B story, and you know, C story, the landlady's trying milk deliveries, and something happens with that.
right.
You know, and
Yeah,
you're starting to get it, and so this is what I mean. Like when you know what it is you've got to do, when you know what the shape is, you know, sometimes people go, "Oh God, it's so formulaic," or "I don't want to tick those boxes," but it's your friend, and you know,
yeah,
so go, I'm going to write a pop song. Well, I need a chorus. What's that going to be? Oh, now I need some verses, and you know,
yeah,
you know what you've got to do.
yeah. No, totally. I love it. And also that when you have that structure as well, then it doesn't mean then like you don't feel closed off, but you can look at a piece. Like my first instinct is to say happy ending, but then immediately the contrarian wants to be like, oh, but what if we look at the other end? But now I'm only looking at one piece as opposed to the whole thing to test it. And
Hmm.
also, lovely if like working with writing partners or groups or getting feedback to have the structure to be able to talk around, because I've been involved in a few different collaborative processes. And when you have just got that blank page, can be so hard, and particularly if it's like we're over here doing characters and setting in this, actually to be able to, like we've just done just now, kick it around and go back, and then like go back to, oh, but what if this was the turning point instead, or what if this, or if we did this B point, like it gives you those some stable ground to be able to play on instead of trying to play in a swamp. So I love it.
Very good, very well put.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah. So thanks so much for your time today, Chris. You're such a comedy genius brain. I love it. Thank you. And where should people go to find out more about you and your work?
Well, chrishead.com is the simplest place, and I've written a couple of books. One on stand up, the one that's it has got some stand up stuff in it, but is about half-hour comedy scripts and other kinds of comedy, is creating comedy narratives for stage and screen. My second book particularly ties in with this stuff. But yeah, I mentor writers all the time, and I'm running courses, most of which are actually now on Zoom, which is really great because I have people from here, there, and everywhere joining them. Yeah, so I think visiting my website is a good first port of call.
Yeah, totally. And listeners, I've taken one of Chris's brilliant courses and had help in a one-to-one session, and it's just so useful. And Chris asks brilliant questions. So he's brilliant at giving those frameworks and also asking really insightful questions that will melt your brain and turn it around in new ways in the best possible sense. So thanks so much, Chris. It's been so fun chatting with you today.
Great, thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you, Danielle.